What Do You Do is a jobs and careers podcast dedicated to demystifying careers we don't know much about and exploring unique approaches on ones we think we do. I'm Adam from Dandelion Video Production, and each episode I'll be having honest conversations about what these careers actually involve. Today I'm here with Kath Holmes, a professional organiser. So if you're looking to understand a bit more about how to stay organised, or just want to have a nosy about Kath's job, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the podcast, Kath.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm very excited for you to be here, not because I consider myself an amateur organiser. So, what does a professional organiser do?
Yeah, what's the difference between an amateur and a professional?
Yeah.
A professional organiser, essentially, I think, is the phrase that was coined when people first decided to make this a job, and by putting the word professional in front of it, I guess it just means that someone will pay you to come in and do it. And the reason why I guess people do that is because they either can't do it themselves for life being too busy kind of reasons. They might have neurodiversity that just means they find it really hard to get started. Or they might not live in the location where the organising needs to take place. So actually you need to hire someone who can go in and do that for you. So yeah, it's not just that kind of 15-minute reset on a Sunday night that hopefully most people do as part of their, weekly reset. It's normally kind of a little bit more than that.
Okay. So when we talk about organisation, do we mean organising a cupboard, organising a whole room, organising a whole building? What's the scale? What scale do you operate at?
I guess, yeah, the scale can range from as minute to as major as you like. Obviously, generally, I'm not just going to go in for a drawer unless it's like the world's biggest drawer and it's going to take a few hours to rifle through. But yeah, we kind of always say that some people just have a cupboard of doom, and actually that can be what you need help with. But generally, it's a room. It's more than just a cupboard. So my kind of general starting point tends to be that someone has got a particular room where they need help with, and then either from that it expands into the whole house or the whole building. And I have done offices, I have done work for businesses, perhaps if they've got product-based business, and they've got a lot of products that they need to keep on top of, or if you are kind of using storage facilities as part of your business, then actually they need to be realistically, kind of optimally organised. So yeah, it can be anything, big or small, just anywhere that you can't do yourself.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned the starting point because I'm actually curious. So you come in. Well, what's the starting point when you see this big mess? What's the first thing that goes in your head?
There's a couple of starting points. So generally I would have already had a conversation, whether that be a video call or even face-to-face, visited the client themselves. So my starting point needs to be kind of understanding why we are in the kind of situation we are, because generally there's a reason for that. And then kind of what the client's objective for that space is. So quite a nice one for you actually, like a really easy one can be first child or second child. You've had two lovely spare rooms, or you've had an office room, and actually you now need to make it a nursery. So actually I'm really clear then on kind of what the objective is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it can obviously be a bit grayer in that people have it's just got on top of them, or the garage has just become the dumping ground. So again, it's kind of just understanding what is the ultimate aim for this space, because that's going to make the difference. So quite often we'll see it where people, their garage always needs to be their storage space. We can't get away from that, but it needs to be an organised storage space, not a just dumping ground kind of storage space. And then in terms of the starting point on the day, it really depends. If it's kind of a kitchen makeover, I'll generally just empty everything. If it's a wardrobe makeover, we're going to empty everything. When it's one of those rooms that you kind of see on perhaps the TV programmes, or you'll see like a viral thing on social media where it's just chaotically full, generally the way I operate is I just pick a corner, be it left or right, and I just start, whether that be emptying a box, removing things out of the room. Generally I need a bit of a clear space to try and then work through those items, but most of the time you just have to start. So naturally you just pick a logical section to go either left to right or right to left, rather than just standing in the middle of the room thinking, oh my God, what do we do next?
Yeah. In terms of that last point, what's the worst place you've ever seen? I mean, not pointing any fingers at anyone, but like, what's the biggest challenge you've faced in terms of organisation?
It's a real mixed bag. So I guess it's good to kind of highlight that there are professional organisers that will work specifically or exclusively with perhaps hoarders or people with a real kind of hoarding disorder, which is an actual recognised mental health challenge. Personally, that's not really where I feel like my area of expertise is. So if someone did come to me with one of those, then generally I will redirect them. I'm actually part of an organisation called APDO, the Association of Professional Declutterers and Organisers.
Okay.
There are, I think, over 300 members across the UK. So generally, if it's not someone I can help, I can obviously redirect them to that. But I did have someone last year who was kind of on the border. And essentially when you walk in and you see shoe boxes lined up in the hall, and then they go around the corner, and then they're lined up in the bedroom, and then in the lounge, that's when you tend to have a bit of an inkling. And then it really just depends on the circumstances as to kind of where that person's at, as to whether they are ready to actually relinquish those items. And if they are, then generally I can work with them. If I kind of establish that there's a real reluctance to do it, then that's when, for me, I don't feel like where I am at in my career, I don't have perhaps the right kind of skill set to manage, because there's a whole element of, kind of managing the mental health challenges that come with it. So that one would tend to be somewhere I would kind of not go down that road. So for me, the things that I prefer are just the rooms that have just become full of stuff, and that people go, I don't know where to start, and they say, oh yeah, this was my spare room, or this was where my kid used to live before they moved out. And I'm like, oh, there's some furniture in here. Like, yeah, there's a bed in there. And I'm like, oh, okay, there's a bed. So it's almost like, then you're right, this is my challenge. How quickly could I remove these items and go through them with the client and categorise them to find this kind of magical item of furniture? Because generally that room should have a purpose. We don't really ever buy houses to just have rooms full of stuff. We buy houses to live in and enjoy, and either socialise, host, have people to stay, whether that be friends, family, grandchildren, children, nieces, nephews. So generally there's a bigger picture as to what we want to do with those rooms. Yeah,
you just reminded me actually about when we moved into this house, because we found out we were pregnant as we were moving in. So it was just going to be a room, and then it suddenly had to be a nursery within so many months. But the room had become the dumping ground, and we couldn't really move into it because everything had just gone there. And we basically, because we didn't have either a space necessarily to work to organise stuff either, we pretty much had to get it clear enough sufficiently so we could put a fitted wardrobe in, and then organise some things into the fitted wardrobe, and as the space cleared, start getting rid of some stuff and sorting it. But it was just like, until we'd cleared enough to get extra storage into the, sounds counterintuitive, putting more stuff into the room to get stuff out of the room was the only thing we could do, because there was just so much stuff to get rid of. But I can imagine that's
and there's
quite
a time element to it, isn't there? You've got a child kind of on its way, so you've got to do it. And I think that's quite often what happens, is we get that call at the kind of panic mode of, oh yeah, I've been meaning to sort out this room. And then that'll be quite often as well when it might be the dad as well that kind of goes, oh God, you know what? One thing I promised her that I was going to do was get the nursery sorted, and actually I haven't, and we've got 2 weeks to go. Kind of how can we kind of turn this around? So we always like a challenge, and that's definitely one of them.
Absolutely. Going back to what you're saying as well about knowing your limits in terms of how you can help. So I suppose people are really attached to their stuff. I mean, I'm really attached to my stuff, and it's just like, I suppose there's quite a big barrier there, even with people that don't have additional needs to to help them help convince them they don't need to keep certain things, or it should be stored in a certain way. How do you handle that? How do you handle? Because I want to ask. I'm basically leading towards the question of you did a post recently about handling items kept from people who recently passed away. So I suppose, how do you handle those kind of situations?
Sensitively, obviously, that is really kind of key part of it. I think with compassion, with empathy, and I think, like I said, it'll probably keep coming up, but it all goes back to that starting point, the relationship that we've kind of built at the start of this kind of journey that I'll have with a client, because you can understand the reasons why. So, you know, some people will contact you imminently because that's just what they need to do. Other people, it will, you know, take them a while. And then it's kind of understanding where they're at, where their head's at, what's important to them, you know, what are the kind of the reasons why. A lot of the time people would have been given advice from friends or family, and actually that might not be relevant for them individually. So it's kind of just using, I guess, my experience in these situations to kind of understand and chat with them about what items hold versus what memories hold versus obviously the space around you and how, you know, you kind of live in it. And I think I'm not a grief counsellor, I haven't done that, but I feel like I know enough to understand that everybody will go through their journey, and at times you need things, at times you need the memories, and actually at times by removing some of those items it actually helps you move on in that kind of grief journey. So we'll always do it sensitively. It can often take longer, you know, with someone who's kind of a grief client, as you might call them, than, you know, someone who's just got overwhelmed with their own stuff. But also I think it's generally kind of part of the process and quite therapeutic for them. And there'll be different things that matter to different people, you know. So some people, the clothes are the one that, you know, just cause them to stop in their tracks because they hold all of the, you know, the memories. Whereas for other people it might be the books. You know, if you're dealing with a parent's house, then actually if they've kept your, you know, childhood storybooks, then actually it's the memory of having that story read to you that could be perhaps worse than the memories of the clothes that they wore. So it's very much kind of taking it step by step, understanding what we need to do, and generally again it goes back to the reason. So it might be that ultimately they've actually got to remove these items because they've got to downsize. They either can't afford to live in that house that they're in, or they want to downsize, so actually they can't take those things with them. So it's about reminding them of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Obviously we're doing this digitally, and I think what I really love about technology nowadays is that, you know, we can take photos. So we could take photos of key bits of paperwork, artwork, photos. You know, if there are things that really, really matter to them, let's create some sort of memory drive for them. And then actually we can gently kind of remove then the other items. But yeah, it's really difficult to say, yeah, it's A plus B equals C, because it just doesn't work as straightforward as that.
No, of course, exactly. There's like everyone handles things differently, and everyone. I mean, say for instance, I haven't kept many items from my grandparents' house, for instance. I kept ones that had significance, but I thought, whereas my mother kept a lot of stuff, and it's kind of like I took photos of the things that I wanted, exactly like you just said, about making sure that here, if I want to remember this, I can look at the photo and go, this, I don't have to have this whatever taking up space in my house. That's I'm a premium at, because I do have one child and one on the way. So yes, it's just,
the space is already at a premium, I guess.
Exactly, yes. So it's just making sure those it's like the memories are preserved without preserving the physical object. And I guess what am I trying to say? I was going somewhere with this, but yes, I suppose when you're saying about there's not always a clear answer. It's like, how do you estimate how long a job will take, and how long could you work with a client?
It's all about the kind of job that we're talking about. So if it is, look, this room needs sorting because it needs to be changed into this type of room from this, then generally I can look at the amount of stuff in there and I can generally gauge on how long it will take, assuming that they're going to be quite straightforward to go through the stuff with, which generally when it is that kind of room of doom, it doesn't always hold everything that's memories. It's just the spare clothes, the shoes, the toys, the garden furniture. Sometimes it can be all that kind of stuff, so it can be a bit more straightforward. Generally when it's anything that's kind of loss related, grieving related, then I will be much more loose with my kind of recommendations or proposals, because it is really, really difficult. Generally as well with that, it's an older client. Obviously that's not exclusively the case, but obviously by default that tends to be the thing, and they generally don't want to do as longer sessions. So I've got a lady at the moment where I just do an afternoon a week, and that is enough, because there's a whole load of stuff to go through, and actually it takes her time, but that's the process, that's the way she wants to kind of operate. So yeah, with her we didn't even talk about an estimated amount of time. It was just, this is the project that we want to do, and we will book in some sessions, and then we will review it maybe every kind of 4 weeks or something. So yeah, I'm generally kind of honest and up in my kind of upfront conversation about, yes, I can give you an estimate, but it's based on this and this. I can't really give you an estimate, but we can review it kind of as and when you want, because generally those kind of jobs, they're going to take some time to get into the process, to get warmed up to kind of working with me and understanding what the aim is. But once they're in it, actually the goal seems more achievable, so they're willing to kind of do the work that they need to do to achieve that. So yeah, there's a real kind of difference between almost what I'd say kind of very, very standard job and then a very kind of bespoke job. I just, yeah, like I said, I'm just honest about with almost which one you kind of sit, which category you kind of fall under.
Yeah. I suppose as well, like, the clients appreciate the objectivity that you bring of just like, it's just an old pair of shoes, for example. It's like
Yeah.
do you still need to keep this, or do you need to keep it as a memory? And I was going to say as well, when you do work, do you work with the client in the room with you? Do you do a set amount on your own and then ask them to review what you've decided, or how do you approach? What's the day-to-day like, I suppose?
Yeah, so I'd say anything where it's, again, I've almost kind of, just gone into this remit now, standard or bespoke. So if we're doing something that's pretty standard, then I will work probably 75% of the time on my own, and I will just pull the client in at certain stages. So, if we're doing a kitchen overhaul, generally that's probably the room that holds the least emotional items in your house, I would guess. There'll always be, the spatula that your grandma gave you or something, but generally, I can lay out everything and I can kind of go, look, we've got 20 spatulas. I think we should keep 3, 5. You'd be working on the kind of the relativity of the size of the kitchen, and is this person a baker or do they just have spatulas because they think they should, as an example. And therefore they just need to come in and pretty much yay or nay that decision with me. Same with wardrobe, same with kind of, kids' toys. So anything where I can kind of just use my kind of logical approach of, well, these are all the toys in these categories, and then I can just kind of show you, this is how many jigsaw puzzles you've got, for example, and actually this is how many jigsaw puzzles you've got for under 5s, and we know that your 2 children are 8 and 10, let's say, for example. So realistically, we probably don't need those jigsaw puzzles for the kids aged under 5, so let's remove those from the house, be it donating them, selling them, whatever it might be, giving them to, friends or family who have got children under the age of 5. So again, for those kind of jobs, generally the client will be around, but just to be called in at, certain times. What you tend to find with, again, like I said, the more bespoke kind of projects is that it needs to be much more of a kind of hand-holding exercise, because if they're in that situation where we are going through stuff that holds memories anyway, then it's much harder for me, especially at the beginning, to be able to say, okay, well, here's this pile of papers or these teaspoons or this thing here. You probably don't need these, do you? Because they were in that room, whereas actually it could be the most valuable item to that person in memory of the person that they've lost, and therefore I can't just make that kind of sweeping pre-sort generalisation, I suppose. So yeah, generally those kind of jobs, they will be much more hands-on.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because like I say, it takes like a soft touch, because you can't always understand the significance of an item until you've made a suggestion and someone says, no, that's this, I need to keep it for this reason. But it's your job just to make the suggestion and help them to be as comfortable as they can with understanding why that it's not necessarily needed. But do you help it with any of the removal of the items, or do you just make recommendations and then so if it is a charity shop, do you do anything like that? Do you throw them away?
Yeah, so as part of my terms and conditions, I say that I'll take like a carload away with me, and luckily I've not got a small car, so that can generally be quite a few bags. I don't have a van equally, so it also means that I can take stuff to the tip. So again, I'll kind of judge that based on the space before we've gone in, as to say, look, yeah, we're probably going to have a carload worth of donations, hopefully, so I'm happy to take some of those for you. If it's a bigger project, then there's a charity that work nationally that will actually come and collect. They haven't been in our area for a while, unfortunately, but apparently they've been rejigging their warehouses and they will be back here soon, because that was basically my saving grace for anything more than about 5 bags for the charity shop.
Yeah,
you could book this company to come, and they just come and take it away from you. If it's like furniture, then I would always kind of help them look at options for rehoming that furniture. So if it's particularly antique, then obviously make recommendations as to perhaps antique dealers in the location, or if it's not actually worth anything but they don't want the furniture, then obviously look at places like British Heart Foundation, or some of the hospice charities obviously that we have locally, because most of them have furniture in their shops and can actually come and collect it as well. So as part of that kind of pre-work, before I've even turned up, we've already thought about some of those items, because I think what I've kind of learned through doing it is that if we just leave the stuff in the house to go to its next home, it probably won't go anywhere, especially not straight away. And actually what I want to do, obviously, when I leave, is leave them with a real sense of achievement and a real noticeable change. So even just not having the stuff in bags lined up in the hallway, it already has released some of that kind of mental burden, because that's a lot of the reason why people almost don't ever do it themselves, because they've tried to do it and they've got the stuff into the charity bags, and maybe they've even got them into the car, and then they've just never taken them. So then eventually they come out of the car because they needed the car for something else to be full. So then they've gone into the garage, or they've gone back into the house. And then obviously that just kind of builds that cycle of like, oh, I just can't do it. It's not for me. We're just going to have to suck it up and keep the stuff. And obviously that is what ultimately compounds the problem in the future, because if you do that all the time, then eventually you do physically run out of space. So yeah, it's really important for me that we do try and remove the items, and what I've recently started doing, and I've got one lady that I'm doing it with at the moment, is actually offering like a vintage sales service as well.
Okay.
Because again, that's quite time consuming. It's a fine balance between obviously what we can and can't sell, but generally, if you're willing to just accept that you're not going to make millions of pounds, because that's not what Vinted is about, but actually just getting your stuff on there. I think when I looked at it yesterday, I've probably got about £70 worth of stuff on there for her at the moment, and that was one bag.
Right.
We've got 3 more bags to do, so we could easily be at £200 worth of stuff to sell. And generally how I operate is I'll just take 50%. So she's made £100 and I've made £100, which sometimes you're like, oh, that sounds a lot. But if you were never going to get that stuff on there in the first place, then that's £100 more than you were going to get. If you've got the energy and the kind of go ahead to do it yourself, then great.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do it, and you'll get the full £200, and that's fine. But again, it's that whole thing of the reason why people generally don't, and therefore would want to use that service, is because actually their time, is more valuable to them doing something else. So it's worth investing essentially £100 into selling their clothes and getting still something for it. So again, I don't think I'll do it. It's kind of a pick a mix, and I wouldn't do it for every client I ever do, because actually then I've got to do that obviously in my other working hours, and generally if I'm out in people's houses I don't have hours to do that, but I can kind of sense again with each client whether it's going to be a service that's valuable to them and therefore offer it as part of the proposal.
Yeah, of course. And I was thinking about how, I mean, you say it sounds a lot, but it's like you've got to list it, you've got to pack it, you've got to take photos, you've got to wait until it's actually sold, and it's going to be in your house until that happens. And then, I think it's more than fair to ask something like that in terms of that price. You mentioned something about, I can relate to this a lot, about mental load, and I feel like it's a weight off when I finally get that stuff out. It's just like, if things I don't have to think about, if the cupboard's clean now, or it's got something in that actually lives there rather than this, and I imagine it's very fulfilling seeing a customer's space cleared, uncluttered. Sorry, yes, by your effort, and I imagine there's a lot of they feel a lot of relief from seeing the work that you've done.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's the bit that is so hard to really get across. So obviously when I'm doing, social media, and when you do things on your website, you can do these lovely before and afters, and that's great, and people look at the after and they go, oh wow, that looks great. But I think you can really underestimate again the kind of the transformational element to it, and there are probably loads of mental health stats in terms of what clutter does. I think when I was doing a talk last couple of months ago, I did a bit of research, and it said something like on average we make around 35,000 decisions a day.
Right.
And again, I guess if you're a busy family, then that might be slightly more than if you're a retired couple maybe living a lovely life, but also if you are a busy family, those decisions are going to be about are the kids fed, closed, have they got clubs to go to, kind of are they well, are they healthy, are they happy. You want your energy to be going into those decisions, not into I can't find their PE kit, oh my god, I don't even know what day of the week it is there any clean washing, they've got a friend coming round for a play date, is the playroom tidy. So I think it's kind of like working out again how many of those decisions in your day are ones that you shouldn't need to be making because of the environment that you live in, and therefore by removing that and making it easier. And I think what I really love and kind of can see over the generations is how obviously we've evolved, and I think why we end up with a lot of clutter with kind of the older generation is because it's kind of post-war, everything was valuable, you didn't get rid of anything, and you made and you mended, and then maybe you got another one but you kept the old one in case the new one broke. That's then kind of filtered down into the next generation, which I would say is kind of my generation and probably yours, but also what's come with that is fast fashion, Amazon, cheap delivery, cheap items. So actually something breaks, well, we get another one, and then the wrong one comes, and we've ordered the wrong size. Can we be bothered to send it back? No. Is it worth selling? No, because it was only £1 in the first place. So we keep it, we order the next one, someone donates us something and we're so grateful to have received that, but actually we don't need it, but we don't really know what to do about it, so we just say yes and we keep that. So we're in this generation of like, we've inherited stuff, we've inherited a way of kind of working, and then we live in an age where we can just buy the stuff that we want to buy. And then all of a sudden we kind of go, why can't we move, why can't we breathe, why have we got so much stuff? And actually, to go back to ultimately your question, by removing that stuff, we are completely removing the kind of the mental load that all of that stuff carries. And I think it's that real fine line between, but that stuff was, I've spent money on it, and that's a big thing that I talk about in all of the mindset work that we do with decluttering and organising is, yes, but the money went the second you bought that item and you brought it into your home. Kind of got no value, and it's a really difficult one for people to kind of understand, and for some people they can't, or it'll take a while to really get there. But ultimately that is the reason why we have the items, because we feel guilty that we've spent money on them. And actually what we need to kind of be okay with is saying, but actually that item is not bringing me, you know, any excitement, any joy, you know, any love. It's actually taking value from my life
Hmm.
because I'm stressed, I'm late because I can't find the things that I need to find, you know, I'm overbuying in my food shop because I didn't realise what I had in my cupboards. And it's trying to kind of re-educate people on that value proposition, I guess, in terms of spending and then what you need to do. And actually, by being more organised, you should hopefully spend less, spend more mindfully. Um, the lady I did my training course with, called Dilly Carter, and she's the organiser on the BBC programme Sort Your Life Out, and she runs courses to kind of just elevate people like me with our business. But it was really, really useful because a lot of the stuff she talks about is kind of the mindset and the value proposition. And she's very much like, you know, I like nice things, but because I like nice things, I buy quality, not quantity. And I'm really mindful of what I buy and how I buy. I had never heard of the one in, one out rule until I trained with her. And that really resonated with me, I think, particularly with clothes, because again, so easy to be like, oh, well, I've seen that pair of jeans and I quite like the style, so I'll buy another pair of blue denim jeans. But then, will I wear them as well as the ones I've already had, or will I just swap out wearing another pair for those ones that I bought? Realistically, I will probably wear the new ones more than I will wear the old ones. So
Yeah.
it's about having that kind of mindful conversation with yourself to say, it's fine to buy stuff, but what am I going to do to kind of shift? And one in, one out is hard because it's almost like you've got to make that decision all the time. But I guess the principle is it just slows you down a little bit and it makes you think twice, maybe, particularly with perhaps that kind of mid to high value items. You know, yes, there's some stuff that we have to buy all the time and it's frequent and whatever, but that stuff that's a bit more in there in terms of, you know, does your kid really want? And I've seen a lot of them, these big like Barbie doll houses or big Barbie doll castles. They take up a lot of space. And if your daughter has just got into that era and she's into Barbie phase, great. Maybe she doesn't play with the toy kitchen as much. So again, it's having that conversation with them and understanding and saying, okay, well, yes, you can have that, and that is your new really exciting kind of toy, but let's remove then an item that is kind of taking up loads of space and actually you probably won't get as much value from. Obviously that's not always going to happen, but again, just trying to think of that kind of example of like, we don't have elastic walls in our houses or in our flats or in our properties or wherever we live, so we can't just keep on filling them. We have to find ways to manage our space effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I realised a while ago, it's not so much fast fashion, but it's just like buying several cheap items. You don't realise how much adds up because it's like, oh, it's just cheap, I'll buy it. But then you buy so many, you may as well just bought the expensive thing in the first place, which would have only been one item rather than have many taking up a clutter in your house. So that's a good point there. Like, talking about the one in, one out rule, are there any other rules or sort of rule sounds like, well, I suppose it's rule, but rule sounds quite strict. But are there any other things like that that you apply to things or you know about?
Yeah, so I think people always think, oh, professional organisers or home organising, storage, you know, I need to buy baskets and boxes and jars and whatever else it might be to, you know, that will solve my problem. And it's always like a really fun kind of conversation and dynamic with people because we love storage as organisers. You know, our after photos when there is beautifully lined up baskets or jars with sweets and crisps and pastas in it, you know, we get obviously huge pleasure from seeing that kind of organisation and stuff. But there's kind of two real important kind of scenarios there. Is one, you can't store clutter, like, because you're not actually, it's not organised. You know, storage is designed to organise the items in your home for optimal use. It's not designed to hide the clutter. And then secondly, it's kind of, does that work for you? You know, so there will be certain, I guess, neurodiverse types that wouldn't necessarily find closed, hidden baskets helpful because they'd have no idea what was in them, even if they were labelled. You know, they're not going to add any kind of value to them. So again, it's kind of looking at what's the right kind of storage for those people. a lot of people will be like, but do I need to like decant my rice and my pasta? You know, isn't that going to take time? Yes, it will take a few more seconds to do when you get your shopping home, but you won't have then a pantry that's got 12 packets of rice in because you forgot that you bought them and then you just put another one in there. You can literally see when you open your actual cupboard full of those items how much you've got of each one, and do you need to kind of buy any more. So generally, yeah, kind of storage is always a real fun one, and it's also a tricky one because ultimately storage costs money and not everyone has that. You know, they're already investing in you to come and do this work with them. So again, what's quite fun is actually what can we find. You know, you'll see so many organisers who will show drawers and actually all that they've used in them is the takeaway, like little plastic, you know, boxes and things that you've received, because actually they make great junk drawer organisers. So we can be creative as well with, you know, what we do. So that's probably I guess the main one that comes to mind, yeah, when you say kind of rules. And then kind of it goes back, the process is always about what's right. So ideally we would always empty the space, going back to obviously what you said earlier, if you've got the space to kind of sort into. If not, we will just make a small amount of space and decant. But generally, to be able to know what we're getting rid of, we need to be able to see everything. So if I'm trying to do a wardrobe declutter with someone and I've just got all of their jeans out and said, right, okay, let's look at, you know, how many pairs of jeans you've got and how many you need. And then actually we suddenly realise that there's a cupboard that we haven't emptied and that had another load of jeans and other clothing items in it, then we're not going to really do the job to its full potential. So yeah, ideally we'll always find creative ways to actually properly kind of categorise everything, go through everything, and then work out kind of what we actually need.
This is very interesting hearing all the different processes go into it and all different ways to think about it. So yeah, I'm loving this. What about you as a person makes you good at what you do?
I think I feel like there's an element of you have already this kind of personality trait of being kind of unorganised. So I guess if psychologists or whatever were to do stuff, then there'd be, you know, bits and pieces that we're born with. I would say I'm probably relatively neurotypical, which I think, not that I'm saying you can't be neurodiverse and do this job, because I think there are probably lots of people that do that, but they've probably had to train themselves to be a certain way to be able to obviously operate well. So I think there's an element there of definitely that. I went somewhere yesterday and the lady said to me as we left, she's like, she calls it type A and type B, and she was like, you're definitely a type A, you've reversed in, you're parked really straight. She's like, I'm a type B, I'd have just ran in, just dumped the car, it would have been wonky, randomly parked, whatever. So I do think there's an element of like, yes, your kind of innate personality. I think I've always been someone that's enjoyed having an organised space. I think everyone grows up with their own kind of, you know, mental challenges or physical challenges or family challenges or whatever. And I think for me, when I was younger, having a sense of order in my room was probably what kind of got me into the place that I am now, because my bedroom was just my sanctuary. And therefore, when I got my first home was my sanctuary. I've moved into the house I am now and I have more space, but it was still, I really value my home and what it kind of gives me, and I think I really appreciate how much value that should have. But from doing the job I do, I see how for a lot of people it doesn't, and generally it really, you know, kind of does make you sad, because you think, you know, this is the place that we're all very grateful when we have a home, and obviously that's amazing, but when we do have one, if you don't, you know, if you're working hard all day, or if you've got, you know, you're caring for someone, or you've got a really complex, chaotic life, for me, the one place that you should be able to come back to and just like step through the door and relax is your home. And if you don't have that, that just is what I think kind of drives me and gives me the passion and the motivation to try and get someone back to that space. Like we always use the analogy of hotel rooms, you know, when people's bedrooms are really chaotic, and we're like, but you think about, you're trying to fall asleep there, and sleep is one of the most important things we need as human beings. If you can't get to sleep because the state of your room is chaotic, like you're making life hard for yourself. If the first thing you see then when you wake up the next day and you already know you're maybe going to face some complex, challenging moments in your day, and actually you've woken up in an environment that's already stimulated the wrong kind of feelings for you, then isn't that really like challenging and really difficult? So can we not try and, you know, kind of find a way to improve that? And then throughout that, you know, that rest of the day and the rest of the house, I just think we underestimate how important that space is. And I think the world that we live in now, and neurodiversity is becoming more, you know, we're all more aware of it, we're more aware of the challenges. Obviously we're trying to cater for that with how we socialise or how we bring up our children, but actually again it's really important to have that environment at home, you know. So generally for neurodiverse kids, you know, they can't live well in a chaotic, messy, disorganised house. You know, I guess if you're on the autism spectrum and you really need things to be really kind of quite straightforward, and things that go outside of a routine can really mess you up, then, you know, your playroom needs to be organised. You need to know where you can find the toys that you want to play with. So as a parent, don't you want to give your child, you know, that kind of opportunity? So yeah, I think there's so many ways and reasons why people need that support. And I guess for me, it comes naturally to me, like it's just logical. Like I said, for me, I can walk into a room and I can go left or right and I can work my way around, whereas for a lot of people, they walk into the room and they just stop and go, I don't know what to do. So they walk out and they shut the door.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because that's why they don't do the job that I do, and they do the job that they do, because I probably couldn't do the job that they do. So it's being able to be okay with the fact that you can get someone in who has got, and I don't really know what the skill is. I think it's an element of like calm, an element of just not getting overwhelmed, excuse me, that you can just kind of get in there and be like, well, okay, like I can see how this can unfold. Couldn't necessarily tell you exactly when it's a room of doom exactly how I'm going to get there and what we're going to find along the way, but I can see the end, whereas for a lot of people they can't see past that first step, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You were saying about you're not sure what you're going to find along the way. That really made me think about, like, what has there been a particularly interesting thing that you found, or what's the most interesting thing you've helped someone get rid of?
Trying to think. I mean, the lady that I'm working with quite regularly, we found, I think it was about £3,000 in foreign currency recently, because it was like notes. I can't remember which country it was. It wasn't Europe, because obviously I don't remember if it was euros, but it was one of those where, again, it went back to the grief element of she lost her husband, and actually that bag, I think he had become unwell on the holiday, so lots of chaotic things obviously ensue after that. Come home, do what you do, bags from the holiday, I guess, just get plonked somewhere. Didn't need them, didn't go back to that place anytime soon, didn't even think about it. Moved house, that stuff got stuck in a cupboard, and then we were just going through it, and then she just pulled out this envelope, and I was like, what is that? She's like, oh my God, I think you can take that to the travel agent or, you know, the foreign exchange place, and you'll be able to get that back, you know. And it was just, but again, it was still bittersweet because of, you know, the memories it kind of created. I found someone's child's birth certificate. I think the child was like 8 or 9, and they hadn't assumed that it had been lost for life, and that they just hoped that they didn't need it because they didn't want to bother buying another one. And that was just randomly like buried under a pile of paperwork. I haven't found it, but I've heard quite often that ashes, generally, you know, again, when, especially if you're dealing obviously with a bereavement, either the client just hasn't told you that they've decided to bring their, you know, bereaved losses, ashes home, or sometimes it can actually be that the person that's lost has perhaps got somebody else's, whether it was their own parents or perhaps a distant relative and no one knew what to do with it, and so they just kept them, and basically they've obviously forgotten that they've got them, and they don't always have a lot of information on them, so sometimes you really have to actually like open the pot to find out what it is. So yeah, I think I've been lucky so far. I definitely think there'll be more to come as the years go by, but
Yeah.
it's all kinds of things, isn't it? It's baby. You hear of stories like baby teeth, umbilical cords, you know. But it goes back to the memories, doesn't it? And obviously, which are the memories that we're keeping, and which are the memories that we can acknowledge and remove from our homes.
Yeah, yeah. You're saying about as the years goes on, how long have you been doing it already, and how did you get into it?
So someone asked me this the other day, and I went back to my first Instagram post because I was like, I think it's about 4 years, and it was actually 5 years. So
Okay.
it would be June 2021 was when I first created the business. I had a name, and then I had a logo, so I was like, right, I can have a social media page now. But it was very much on the side of what I was doing with my life then. But yeah, so officially 5 years this year. But
Congratulations.
thank you. I know it seems a very long time, but I had a lot of other stuff going on in that time. So my dad actually was ill in 2023, so I had to kind of really put a pause on, became kind of primary carer, not in a medical way, but he couldn't drive. So suddenly life changes because you are their just driver. And yeah, he was really unwell, followed then by my stepdad being really unwell. So I basically had about an 18-month time period of very chaotic life, so just decided that it wasn't right to be. I didn't have the headspace to push the business forward. So at the end of 2024, beginning of last year, I really kind of rebuilt, repushed. So I kind of feel like I'm currently really in my second year of like the business actually being full throttle.
Yeah.
And how did I start? I basically had worked in corporate sales for nearly 20 years, and lockdown kind of highlighted to me, as it did for a lot of people, that wasn't what I wanted to spend the next 20 years of my life doing. And I'd done a lot of volunteering, a lot of charity work, and realised that obviously I'd gone from this world where everything you do makes absolutely no difference to anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
Really
Same
wanted to do
feeling.
something that makes a difference for somebody. Looked at like the obvious jobs and was like, I'm really bad with blood and guts, so then he kind of medical world is probably not for me. Do I want to do something kind of with older people specifically? I don't know. So, and then just in a random conversation with someone at work, they were like, what do you like doing? Which I think actually, I know it's one of the questions you thought about. I think it's one of the best things anyone ever asked me is, what do you like doing? I was like, oh, I like being organised, I like being tidy, I love my house, be on top of it, I love doing stuff in my house, I love refreshing things. And then someone said, oh, there's this programme called The Home Edit in America, have you heard of it? It's got a Netflix series. And I was like, no, we're in lockdown, didn't have much else to do, so just binge watched that and was like, I think this could be something. And then obviously then you go, but does this work over here? So then did my next bit of research, and yeah, there were quite a few established businesses even in 2021, and I think because Sort Your Life Out, I think it's on series 6 now, so essentially that's been going, I think it started in 2020. That has elevated the kind of concept of an organised and decluttered home. Stacey Solomon has done her Tap to Tidy kind of series and scenarios for years, which again I think, and I guess coming out of lockdown, people had spent so much time in their homes that actually any type of job associated with homes, I feel like, has kind of boomed in the last few years. I feel like more people have cleaners, more people do stuff in their garden, people are obviously renovating houses, and then mine is just another add-on service that kind of sits in that environment. And like I said, I said to someone the other day, I was like, I feel like part of me kind of hopes that in maybe 40, 80 years, maybe the next generation or the generation after that, maybe the job I do won't exist because we won't live in this, fast, over-consuming world, and people won't need this kind of service. But then ultimately, I guess, personalities won't change. People will still live, in the way that they do, and there'll always probably be a need. But I do feel like it has become particularly prevalent in this current world and phase of life that we live in, that this kind of service can be offered. I guess more and more people live in families where both parents work, or you're caring for parents or other relatives. So actually, we as individuals maybe don't have time to do the things in our own home that perhaps traditionally would have happened, 20, 30 years ago. So I guess, life evolves to change and how we work and how we live, and therefore services like this become more prevalent and more in demand. So obviously I'm really happy, I'm really pleased, and I hope that, there'll always be, in my lifetime, a need for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to go on from what you're saying about where did you go next from watching those programs and deciding it? Did you say you took some training? What training? How long was the training, and what did you do?
So September 2024 I signed up. So Dilly was the only one I knew of at the time. I think there are now maybe 2 or 3 other professional organisers who've basically diversified into obviously running courses. So there was a group of about 25 other women. Not that it's a women-only exclusive job, but I think generally, I reckon about 90% of professional organisers are women, but there are definitely some men out there. But yes, there was a group of women. It was a 14-week course, so we had a weekly Zoom call with Dilly because we were all across the country, and she basically just took us through the home and how she would approach it, how she kind of manages the storage, the conversations, how you approach the kind of the client, the proposal, all that kind of stuff. And then we did a week's work experience with her live down in Surrey, somewhere like that, where basically she puts it out there to her network and says, look, I need a fairly big house because I've got 25 women who want to come and work in the house. But there's always somebody that obviously wants that. So that was just a really nice way of taking the skills that you've learned over the time, and she gives you like practical work to do at home, and then you have to do like 3 case studies as well to get signed off. So I had to do a playroom, a kitchen and a bedroom off my own back, basically show her the kind of the befores and afters to get accredited, so it's like an official CPD accreditation. So I did that, and that went live. I kind of got signed off last March, April, I think. So yeah, really kind of was just pleased with the fact that it was one of those things where you don't necessarily need to do it. So again, if someone's watching this, like, I want to become an organiser, do I need to do a course? Absolutely not. No one has ever asked me when I've gone and spoken to them, are you accredited? Do you have a course? Can I see your certificate? Because, it's a bit like a cleaner, I guess, a bit like a lot of jobs. You don't actually need to do it, you just need to have the skills and be personable. But for me, it just, I think, gave me the focus, the kind of the push. It built me a network and a community of women across the country, many of whom I'm still friends with, so we can kind of bounce ideas off each other, and then it just kind of gave me awareness of other ways of working that, like I said, I kind of wouldn't have necessarily known, perhaps how to adopt things, which strategy to use in which situation, and just little things that I guess you take for granted once you actually do them that I wouldn't have known. So yeah.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, much more into it than I thought. I never appreciated they could be that involved, but I guess there's a lot of different elements to it as well. So you're saying about little things you wouldn't have appreciated. Are there any? Have you got any top tips that you would give to anyone to help them stay organised? I know the whole point is that you want to help people that are organised, but yeah. Are there any tips that you implement in your work to help stay organised?
So I think the 1 in 1 out is really important. I think particularly for clothes, perhaps toys, kind of anything where we kind of generally have a lot of something. When we're going to bring something in, do that. I think it's about working out what is right for you. So I know I touched on in the beginning that for a lot of people, everything is just always chaotic. We're running from the next trip out to the next thing on the calendar to the next emergency or whatever, and all of a sudden it's Monday morning again. My kind of thing to anyone will be, if you can carve out 15 minutes, half an hour on a Sunday evening or a Sunday afternoon to just work out what in your home needs resetting the most at that moment, what's going to make the biggest difference to your Monday morning, as you kind of start the week, then that's really worthwhile. A lot of people will have maybe like a little basket or a little storage box where maybe you keep it in the hallway or in the kind of the kitchen, perhaps where you're the place where you're constantly frequenting the most, and it becomes your stuff to sort box or basket. The aim being it's not too big, because otherwise if it's too big it'll just become full and you'll never do anything with it. But it's kind of like, you can kind of pick it up, and then again that could be what becomes part of your Sunday routine. It's like, right, these are all the items that we didn't know what to do with during the week, so we just put them in there. Now let's figure out, okay, well that was the petrol receipt. I don't run my own business, I don't need a petrol receipt, it can go in the bin. Oh, that's the clothes receipt, that's the post delivery receipt for that parcel, we need to keep that, so let's stick that on the pin board or whatever. Okay, there's some random pairs of socks that we were going to sort, so let's go and put those with the kids' wardrobe, and we're going to sort through and see if we can find the matching socks, and if we can't, let's just accept that the missing socks have gone and we will get rid of the unmatched socks, and off they go. But I think just giving yourself a little bit of a reset, but without making it too overwhelming, can be really, really nice. And just working out what works for you, and also being happy to share, the kind of the responsibilities. Like, I'm a big advocate of you're never too young to be responsible for your items, really, so again, if your children are 3, 4, 5, yes, it's easy to tidy up and clean up after them, but there needs to be a little bit of ownership. But also if you've made it easy for them, because all the toy baskets have got labels on them with Lego or cars or whatever, so they know where to put stuff back. It's not just one person's job to keep the home tidy and organised, it's everybody's. So is it a reward chart that you need for the kids? Maybe your husband needs a reward chart as well if he keeps his part of the bargain, things organised and tidy. Not you, Adam, I'm sure you're very good, but like what will make your home run well for you as a family.
No, that's good. There's very good tips. Yes, I'm only a tiny bit offended, so don't worry about it. I have one last question, and that is, what is some general career advice that you give to everyone? I feel like you touched on it a bit before when you were saying about what you want to do for the next 20 years, but yes.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line, isn't it, between, it's really easy to sit here as an entrepreneur and be like, you should do what's right for you, and if you can do that, then great. I think we spend far too much of our life, far too many hours working, and I feel like you should do at least like 50% of that time you should enjoy what you do. So even if your job involves loads of admin and you absolutely hate admin, but you actually love the practical, physical bit of the job that you do, then great. You can kind of suck up the admin. If you're doing something and 95% of it is draining you, like, there's got to be something else out there that is better for you. And if you're not sure, then have those conversations with your friends and say, like, what do you think like I'm good at? What do you think like my skills are? If you were talking about me to your mate, what would you say Kath is like known for? Like, I was always known as the organised one amongst my friends, even just organising nights out or holidays, so it just was always there. And actually, if my friends had said that to me maybe 10 years ago, I might have been doing this sooner, so I think use your people to ask those kind of questions, to go out, network, look at kind of what else there is out there, because like I said, I didn't even know this was a job either. And I feel like sometimes I'll go to a networking event and someone will say, I'm a such and such, and I'm like, what? That's a job? Like, so I feel like there's so much out there, and there's so much potential, and there's so many different things. And I think, if I don't have children, but I feel like for my nieces, I'm like so passionate that they, you don't get educated at school, do you, about like life and what could be out there. And I feel like what we should be doing in our generation now is empowering, the kids of the next generation to know that there's stuff out there that's different to just You know, I bet you there's no kid out there that says, "Oh, I want to be a professional organiser." You know, it's or a doctor, nurse, vet, fireman, you know, policeman. They see all the kind of standard jobs, but they don't see all of the other jobs out there. And I feel like it's really important that people get to hear about them and see them, because you spend far too long doing it, so you should do something that you really enjoy. That is my absolute biggest passion.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I completely agree with you there. And like you also covered the point in this podcast as well, to like make people understand that these jobs are out there and that you can have a different approach to things and you can find your own path as well. So yeah, I think that's an excellent point to finish on. Thanks for teaming me up there. I hope you've had a good experience. Thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it's been really good, thank you. And you've kept me to relatively good amount of time, I think, because like I said, I can definitely waffle on.
I can chop a bit out, it'll be fine, we'll get you back under an hour. But yes, thanks for joining me. If you'd like to know more about Kath and the work that she does, please visit unclutteredbykath.com. If you're enjoying listening to this, please subscribe. It really does make a difference in helping to grow the podcast and keeps us going. Next week I'll be talking with Martin Cadwallader to find out exactly what a cybersecurity consultant does. Thank you.